Nintendo is one of the oldest and most well-respected video game companies in history, creating iconic franchises such as Mario and Pokemon. Their influence over the medium extends to a lot more than just some iconic characters, however, starting with the way that we play our video games. Before Nintendo hit the scene, we didn't really know what video game controllers were, so hardware developers tried a lot of different things, from phone keypads to joysticks to these weird little boxes with knobs on the ends of them. It wasn't until Nintendo came around with their first two consoles that we got the iconic controller layout, which consists of a directional pad on one side, some buttons on the other, some buttons to pause the game in the middle, and on their later models, two buttons that you could push with your index fingers on the tops. And ever since then, every single video game controller has adhered to this format. Sure, we may have added a few more buttons over the years, and we tend to like the directional sticks more than directional pads nowadays, but Nintendo's legacy lives on through every single controller that we make. Nintendo's also influenced where we play our video games. Before the invention of the Game Boy, playing video games outside was limited to these really low-quality LCD screens that honestly weren't very much fun to play. But the Nintendo Game Boy really brought mobile gaming to the forefront, where it's arguably been more prevalent than console gaming today. But let's go take a step back and look at the world without Nintendo. The year is 1983. Nintendo hasn't hit the market yet, and the company that's currently on top is called Atari. They, however, will do two incredibly stupid things with that power. First, they let pretty much anyone develop video games for their consoles, so we start seeing a massive influx of games from the likes of Purina Mills Dog Food and Quaker Oats. These are actual games, by the way. And they were just really looking to capitalize on what they thought of as a fad. To add insult to injury, Atari themselves add two really bad video games to the pile. A port of Pac-Man that was nothing like the original, and a game adaptation of E.T. the Extraterrestrial, which was so infamously bad that it's rumored that most of these copies of this game exists in landfills because Atari had to get rid of their stuff by throwing it into it. The culmination of these two failures led to a loss of consumer confidence and the stigmatization in video games that pretty much killed the industry until Nintendo revitalized it in 1995. When they did so, however, they did with a vengeance, starting with a genius marketing campaign. Notice that this advertisement doesn't actually have the word video game inside it, and that was intentional to make sure that Nintendo distanced themselves as far away from this segment as possible. They were essentially telling consumers, this is not the video games that you've come to hate. And to that end, they created some innovative new technologies, such as Rob the Robot, which was a robot that was designed with the first console to play your video games with you, which is pretty cool. Obviously, it didn't work very well because it was 1980s and blah, 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 but consumers and the video game industry took notice, and to this day, Nintendo has had this reputation of being technological pioneers, such as with their Wii motion sensing controllers, which has been copied to rather ridiculously suspect degrees. The other problem that Nintendo had to deal with was that oversaturation of the market, which they dealt with the Nintendo seal of quality. In order to sell a game in the market for a Nintendo console, they need to actually look over the game and put the seal on it. So they essentially became extremely protective over who was able to develop for their consoles, which the industry has picked up on, especially in terms of anti-piracy. But Nintendo tends to be really extreme in this to almost a fault. For example, when CD technology was first becoming popular, Nintendo went up to a company and asked them to make a CD add-on to their console at the time, which was the SNES. The prototype was made, but due to an argument over licensing issues, they couldn't figure out how to mass produce it, so the prototype fell by the wayside and became a different console. So Nintendo tried again, this time with Philips, a company that you may know. The same exact thing happened. Their stubbornness led to another prototype falling by the wayside and turning into a console. Now, it wouldn't be a problem because nobody remembers what the Philips CDI is anyways, but the first company that they went into dealings with happened to be Sony. And the console that they made was the original Sony PlayStation. So Nintendo's probably biggest influence on the industry is giving them their most major competitor to this day, which is so deliciously tragic. Let's end on a lighter note for Nintendo and talk about Tetris. As you might know, Tetris was an invention of the Soviets, but they didn't really want to market overseas due to a lack of resources and willpower and all that stuff. So they ended up selling the rights to the highest bidder, which happened to be Nintendo. And the version of the game that they made for the Game Boy was pretty much the world's first introduction to Tetris. Without this game, Tetris probably would have never gotten off of the ground outside of Russia, which is really weird because we never think of Tetris as being one of those franchises that was influenced by Nintendo. But that's how ubiquitous they are as a company. They can touch things like the Sony PlayStation, the modern video game controller, and Tetris, and they are so ubiquitous that we have to be reminded that they've done those things. Thank you.